Happy Future Friday. Ezzie, I'm so glad to have you here. You've been a longtime friend and conspirator, and I'm just so inspired by your journey. Having started in this more professional field of law and then going into this world of moon cycles, energy, and ultimately to something that I'm really excited to share with the people who follow along around splinters. And I won't give away too much, so I'll just kick off with just if you could share a bit about where are you calling in from and what are you focused on these days?
Yes, so calling in from sunny Los Angeles, California. And at the moment, I am just so focused, as you alluded to, on the splinters, which is the most fun modality that I've created. And it's almost kaleidoscopic in terms of, where we can go with it. So it's just a bit of an Aladdin's cave of adventure and excitement.
Okay, so I wanted to start with just your journey because I think it's so fascinating. We've talked about it a few times. Just for people listening, like you were the chief editor of the Australian Indigenous Law Review, then you were a legal officer in the Law Reform Commission, then you were in senior policy and projects in the Department of Communities and Justice. So you've really had a real intensive law career, and I'd love if you could share a little bit of this awakening that you had that kind of took you from this one world into basically this totally other dimension, which started with moon cycles and obviously now is in a much different place. But just that awakening moment, can you share that story?
For sure. Yeah. And so many people are surprised when they hear that I did have this background as a human rights lawyer. And I specialized in working with women who were in abusive and relationships, and did my PhD on therapeutic jurisprudence, which is all about the law as healing for women who'd been sexually assaulted. So it was very deep in a very particular career track, which was deeply meaningful. And as you alluded to, what happened was quite dramatic in a way to take me out of that and into working in the more spiritual realms, spiritual energetic realms. And so I really had a spiritual awakening on the 15th of March, 2011. I was working on my PhD at the time. And what happened I actually had a home invasion, which isn't great, but the part that really shook me wide open was the fact that I saw it all the night before it happened. So I'm not talking about a dream. I'm talking about a vision that I had in my apartment where I saw the men come into my apartment and the entire thing played out. So much so that firstly, I was really disconcerted. Secondly, I took action the next day to try to, prevent what was going to happen. Parked my car in a different place, was super vigilant. And then I turned around at one point on the 15th of March, I saw my handbag was gone. So, I was calling the police and trying to tell people around me what was going on. And of course, by the time I got back to my apartment, it was ransacked and the disorientation around that for me was, as somebody who was working in the law, and of course, as a lawyer, you're trained in objective reality. There's linear time. There are facts. The fact that I had been able to effectively break the time-space continuum and see a day in advance what was going to happen was extremely shocking and disorienting to me and blasted me wide open. And from that day forward, I could really see things. I could see energy. I could see things that were really disturbing people on a deeper soul and energetic level. I could jump around in terms of timelines, in terms of seeing where people had been, where they were going, what was the soul's evolutionary journey. And for me, there was an enormous amount of an internal struggle about the fact that seemed really out out of the realms of what seemed logistically right, so there was no one that was more embarrassed and ashamed and shocked and trying to make sense of that than me, because it wasn't rational. I'd come into a different experience of time and space, and it took me many, many years to make peace inside of myself, and a lot of internal work to not try to continue to fit in a world where I desperately wanted to continue to fit in, and to really open up into the feminine magic, which was part of my real experience, and took me in a completely different direction in terms of my career, which really, took off after, 2011, different direction.
One, I just have a question about, were you doing anything sort of to prepare yourself for that moment? Like or was it really truly random, do you think?
I love that question, because I'd started meditating about 10 years earlier. I'd had a daily meditation practice. And a few months prior to this, I deepened my meditation practice through a 10-day silent Vipassana retreat, which I know you've done as well. So I think that it was a lot of internal work, which really prepared for what was effectively a huge breakthrough for me and a quantum leap in terms of my own perception. And I was also working with the moon cycle in terms of connecting in with my own feminine energy alongside of that. So I've been working with the moon cycle for a number of years in order to connect in with my own body, my own feminine cycles, my own rhythms, working in a very masculine, heady, living from the neck up, a very intellectual profession, the law. And so I had been really working with my feminine energy for many years prior to that as well. So it's like very, very, very slow and then very, very, very fast.
Talking about speed and acceleration, you were basically like, your lunar abundance work skyrocketed you into basically like social media fame. And it might seem obvious now because there's so much of that out, but you were actually one of the first people to really start sharing like a lunar calendar and some of the work you were doing. What was that like, and how did it take you from sort of point A to point B to jump into that work?
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing when I look back on it, because as you alluded to, 2011, I mean, Instagram wasn't even a thing at that point in time. And so I started sharing with people what I was experiencing after that spiritual awakening, March 2011. And then people just started to come to me. So I would hold workshops. And again, I was doing my PhD. This was not a planned career change. But people would come to workshops, and it would be 5 people would come, then 10 people would come, then 50 people would come to these events. And then people started to ask me how they could pay me to work with me. And in July of 2011, I was visiting Berlin for a mental health law conference that I was presenting on, and my PhD at that conference. And the people that I was meeting at a meditation center, which was by my hotel, I was also talking about the moon cycle and doing intuitive readings with people. Those Berliners started to just ask me, well, this is what you do for work in Australia, right? And it was the first time that it occurred to me that what I was doing could be something I could do for work, because I had no reference point in terms of the people around me, in terms of what was happening in Australia at that point in time. So I put up a website. I came back from that conference in Berlin in July 2011, put up a website, started sharing on Facebook, and it was a business that just grew one by one. And then I started a blog, and then I started posting on social media, and then I wrote a book, planning to publish that on Amazon. And the moment that I finished the last sentence of the book on the moon cycle, a publisher emailed me and said, can we publish the book? And it just went from there. It sold 40,000 copies, that and its companion titles, and it definitely opened up the world for me in a way that felt like a magic carpet ride, quite honestly, because it was all inbound, and it was all me simply speaking from my heart about what was true for me, and people just responded and flooded in.
One thing I love about the feminine cycles and tuning into that is, and we've talked about this quite a bit, is it's not just summer and spring, but there's also fall and winter. So like life, death, rebirth. And I'd love to shift into now the future, right? Like this, in a way, like fall and winter of what was like this lunar abundance energy that's now shifting into this new rebirth of the concept of splinter. So if you can share a little bit about like that journey of how you take this sort of energy that was really working with lunar abundance, and now we're transforming that into this sort of next new cycle around splinters.
On one level, it might look like suddenly the magic faded, but actually it was part of the inevitable life and death cycle, and then the rebirth cycle. So what lunar abundance was all about was was self-knowledge and personal power. And again, coming back into like, what do we do when we work with the moon cycle? We come into connection with our feminine magic. We come into connection with our cycles. We come into connection with our creative power in terms of setting intentions and so forth. But what I didn't have, and what the practice was not actually about, what my own growth edge was, is that I didn't have self-love and self-worth. And so when all of those people started flooding in, I didn't have healthy boundaries. I was trying to show up and connect with everybody. I was trying to serve, and I was doing that from a place where I wasn't deeply grounded in terms of my own relationship with myself. And so if you are in the public eye and there's any kinks, those will be revealed very, very quickly. And for me, I really needed to go dark for a while, meaning that I needed to come inside of myself and tend to what was really my own blind spot and my own missing link, which was self-compassion, self-love, self-forgiveness. And so the Lunar Abundance book, whilst it was so magical, really initiated me into what was actually a very challenging series of years in terms of tending to myself. And really the turning point for me is when I found the way to take myself off the hook as someone who'd been a real overachiever, as somebody who really strove for excellence in everything that I did. I was also extremely harsh to myself. And some of that striving was coming from me beating myself up a lot of the time. And so discovering for myself self-compassion, self-forgiveness, not just in an intellectual way, but in a felt, embodied way, was the next kernel of magic that led to the rebirth of the splinter work, which is what it is that I do now. And so what I really felt was very distressing, again, to my conscious mind, was that there was some new moon intention. So there were some things that I would work towards creating with the lunar practice that just didn't work. Now, in many areas of my life, like creativity, joy, social, abundance, like I had those things in spades. But what I really struggled with was romantic relationship. And of course, tracking back again to what was my original career, looking at domestic violence and sexual assault, there was a long pattern of working with the darker side of relationship. And so for me, really understanding for myself, why was it that I wasn't choosing partners who are not available for what it was that I wanted to create in terms of committed, loving partnership, was the real entry point for me to find the splinters and to find the ways that, and this is what I now do when I work with people, really finding where are some of the ways where life has pierced you on a deep energetic level, maybe from experiences that you've had in this lifetime, but maybe there are things from before this lifetime that you can't necessarily map to your own experience. So for example, things that you've inherited down the ancestral line. And so, inside of that, discovering inside of myself, I found that there were these splinters that I was carrying, which were distorting the flow of love. And they were shaping my thoughts around relationship. They were very much shaping my choices and my actions and my behavior around who it was that I was choosing to invest in romantically. And so again, coming back to self-compassion and self-forgiveness, because that's the process that I discovered inside of myself in terms of firstly finding these splinters, because it takes a lot of humility to even find the ways where you're realizing, oh, hang on a sec, I might be self-sabotaging. Another nice way to look at that is not saying self-sabotaging, looking at self-protecting, because if you're ever making choices, even though that may seem, strange to the conscious mind, you're making choices as an adaptation to avoiding a deeper pain. So removing those splinters through the process of self-compassion, self-forgiveness, opening up the flow, that then made me completely open and available to a completely different level of relationship. And I started to apply that same modality to not just my clients, but myself in all different areas of life.
What do you feel has been the most exciting thing that you've learned as you've been building out this concept of splinters? And maybe just a quick overview of like what that means, because I've been personally a guinea pig and part of this, and I have loved it. It's really blown my mind. And I focused on the love portion of relationships, but we've talked a lot about like money and finances, and that's obviously been a big part of my past work as well. And then I believe it has to do with purpose, right? So like these major pillars of like purpose, money, and love, and how you basically expand it out, what that spectrum looks like. And I've created a system around it. So maybe just for those of us new to this concept, like what is this framework looking like, and how did you learn to even put it in these pieces?
Yeah. So when I look at somebody, I see three channels of energy. And so I see the power channel, which runs down someone's right hand side. I see the love channel, which runs down the center of the body. And then I see the peace channel, which runs down someone's left hand side. And so we can have splinters, or we can be pierced by life, or indeed our soul, our ancestry can be pierced by life in each one of these three channels. And what we often then do is that we make what I term an unconscious vow, which is an adaptation to the way that that piercing has occurred. So an example of a splinter in your love channel may be heartbreak. That might be something that you've had in terms of an experience in this lifetime. An example of a splinter in the peace channel may be around having some form of betrayal. And an example of a splinter in the power channel may be some way that you've been victimized. So a splinter is always external, it's never your fault, but it is just part of the interaction with life, right? And so oftentimes then what we then have is we have emotions that attach with each one of these channels. So for example, a way to tell if you've been splintered in the power channel may be around feeling the emotion of fear or anger whenever you try to take action in a particular area where you have been splintered. And of course, a classic one in the power channel is around visibility and purpose. So for example, a lot of women are very scared to become visible, and when they're starting to speak out. And it's not because that is anything that's they're not internally because women, we're not internally unable to speak, but it's just that there is a lot of collective patterning, and usually a lot of internal patterning that we may have from this lifetime around some negative ramifications from speaking out. And I remember once you shared with me this incredible picture, Alana, of the way that the women actually were in the medieval times in medieval Europe, were actually had these steel contraptions around their mouths when they spoke, right? So, we can carry these splinters from the collective as well. And that could be really understandable that we're still carrying that energetic imprint of fear. So we make an unconscious vow around not going near that, in terms of wanting to avoid, as a workaround, any of the negative ramifications or punishment. An example in terms of love, for example, if we have had someone in our family line, and again, this is very common with women, where a woman has had to lose herself in terms of the family, where she's had to really sacrifice herself for the relationship. She's had to lose her freedom, she's lost her career, she's lost even her sense of self. And that can lead to an enormous amount of resistance around entering into relationship as well. Now, none of this is our fault, but these are just some examples in very practical terms of how we may be splintered. And then the unconscious vow is the decision that we make at some point to, well, I'll just avoid that whole thing altogether, and that may look like having limiting beliefs. For example, it's just not possible to have a really fulfilling romantic relationship in this day and age. Dating apps have totally destroyed that, or all the good ones are taken, or I missed the boat because I'm too old. So we often then try to attend to those limiting beliefs, but really the limiting beliefs are a symptom of the splinter underneath. And so going into a deeper process where we're finding the root cause of what is causing the resistance, and we're addressing that through a process of self-compassion and self-forgiveness, again, not intellectually, but through a lived felt experience. That's how we can magnetize the splinter out and return us to our true state. And the true state is one where the energy simply flows. So we have the power channel with the energy flowing without the distortion or the impediment, the love channel where the energy is just flowing. And similarly so with the peace channel. That means that we are both open and available for what it is that we want. We're in that place of personal power, but we also have a beautiful internal coherence where we're able to receive what life truly does want to give to us.
So I know you're going to be coming out with a book around this. So yet another published book, which is so exciting. I'm curious where you see the future going. So part of this discussion I like to have with people is what is the sort of maybe unpopular opinion or controversial take that maybe not a lot of people would agree with you potentially, but where you think the future might be going?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we've got some difficult times ahead as a collective, you know, humanity on the planet. And that's, yeah, I think that's just what it is as we look at the future. There are definitely icebergs ahead, so to speak. And so I feel like whilst this inner work that I do, which is obviously really internal and quite spiritual and energetic in nature, it's not uh, it's not the whole picture, right? I think we also need to attend to structural oppression and some of the, the bigger systemic issues, of course. But I feel like what I can contribute through this is having us return to individually and, with the clients and the people that I help, have us return to a place of openness and a place of internal coherence. So then we are best equipped to show up and contribute to a brighter future. And really what it is that I do is all about consciousness and raising consciousness. And I feel like it could go either way right now in terms of the planet. I really do believe that, we've got forces moving in either direction. And I am maybe Pollyanna-ish, certainly a glass half full kind of person. I feel like really at this point in time, it's almost like a survival imperative for us that we really focus on what it is that we can do. And for me, it's about supporting the raising of consciousness so that we can, show up and make a better world together.
So beautifully said. Thank you so much, Ezzie, for the work that you do. I think personally, it's an enormous thing to focus on. And it's so important, raising consciousness. And a lot of times we'll talk about the future in terms of technology and all these more, rational aspects. And I really love to hear about your journey of going from that like heady space of law in where you're super rational into this openness and then building really a system and framework that is a perfect balance of rational reason, logic, and then energetic work. It's really special. How can we keep in touch with you personally as you develop this framework and also publish it into the world, and just in general on your journey?
Yeah, I'm at ezziespencer.com and Ezzie Spencer on Instagram, and you spell that Ezzie and then Spencer. So I would absolutely love to hear from you, love to connect with you. Feel free to send me a DM because I feel like the power of the feminine is really the power to take a quantum leap. And I feel, that's what it is that we all need.
Thank you so much, Ezzie. We'll definitely be following along, and I so appreciate you. This has been so fun.
So fun. Thank you.